Hello, I'm Phillip Taylor from Richmond Green Chambers. I'm going to talk about a book which I've just read called Pleading Guilty by Paul Genney. In it I've given it a title, Not Such a Right Wally After All. This is what I've said about the book. Genney weaves a good tale with this patchwork legal quilt of a fly-on-the-wall series of vignettes linked to his main character, Wally Wallace, from Whitebait Chambers up north. Now, I met Paul recently and he outlined his book to me, and it took my attention, so I bought a copy and had a good read of it. It was read with interest after the defining years of John Mortimer with his main character creation, Rumpole, and of course Sir John's concerns about New Labour's changes to our profession. Since I wrote the review, Sir John has died, but his lasting legacy is there in literature and the law. What I'm interested to do is to see whether this book actually sets any current precedents for modern legal characters after Henry Cecil's Roger Thursby character in the late 50s, which actually was a controversial enough statement in its own time. Most practicing barristers today will identify with the character in this book very quickly, especially with those confronting our flawed hero, Henry Wallace. I'm not going to give the plot away, but let me just say that Genney falls nicely into Somerset Maugham's concept of the novel, which should end with either a death or a marriage, or as Willie said in his most esoteric work, The Razor's Edge, that it should, but in fact it didn't. And so therefore you're always going to have a little bit of difficulty about how to actually end a book. What we've got here, though, in Pleading Guilty is some nice twists as they develop throughout the storyline. Obviously it's day-to-day work at Chambers, but there's a lot more to do with it. It's a book for today, and it's a nice underdone boot kicking, which is softly done at the legal establishment, and it's born more out of a frustration with the system, which we all feel from time to time as practitioners. It's what I see as a snapshot of legal life, because it has the statutory four-letter words in it, a bit too many for my liking, but probably at the publisher's insistence. Obviously some are rather unnecessary, and most of the words are normally quotes in court anyway. Not that we often hear much of that in the robing rooms, because we're actually rather too busy. I came away at the end of the book, so sometimes do at the end of the case, feeling for the loneliness of the advocate, in this case our hero. Many of us have been there with Wallace and the dead client, and some of the more fundamental incidents in life which most portraits of barristers always seem to have to include. In other words, adultery in the personal life, dealing with death, and the quirky clients of one description or another all make up the sum of human interest. But that's what we do. Don't get me wrong, I found this book hard to put down. I became curious and I had a bet with myself as to how Genney would structure and flow his 43 chapters, some of which are quite short. He clearly borrowed some of his old briefs and witness statements, just to refresh his memory, of course. But the result works because the ingredients mix well with the office relationships and the great names he comes up with. I like, probably best, Horace Pickles. Or should that be James Rumpole? Yes, we know who you mean. Readers should look actually at chapters 23 and 27, which I found particularly moving. And I'm sure many legal professionals can identify with much of Genney's understated views. This is a great new contribution to modern Chambers fiction, and if he comes up with a sequel, let's have less of the bad language, more character description, but keep your concept of two legal twists at the end, because I think they're quite nice. Please keep the jokes running, I like especially if they're at the expense of New Labour and certain London sets of Chambers. Well done, Paul. We can't give you a detective writer's dagger, but I will happily give you the Chambers writer's gavel. I've got one around somewhere. Obviously from the departed Rumpole, as Henry, or Harry, has now joined the Legal Fiction Club for the 21st century. And let's hear more from him and from your provincial bar. Go for it. Thanks very much.